Welcome to another edition of the Free Will, Science and Religion podcast. I thought I would talk a little bit today about the problem of crime and punishment. The idea that, well, if we don't have a free will, in the sense that we're just pretty much made by circumstances out of our control, in the sense that the environment and nature built you. It's nature and nurture. I'd say a lot nurture, but whatever. And that means you're a construct of culture, circumstances, parents, teachers, all that kind of stuff. And so you can't really be blamed for the kind of machine you came out to be, because you didn't make you. And that really doesn't matter when it comes to the argument of what you have to do to have a civilization. So I seem to have some disagreement with some people in the arguing for what one of the consequences of not having a free will is somehow we have to, or we need to, or we should treat criminals differently, trespassers against the rules of civilization, because they're not to blame for who they are, or what they did. And I think there's lots of argument to explain why the stick is sometimes necessary. So yes, ideally we could and perhaps should, important words, important distinctions between those words, create great human beings. Be really careful in how we maturate or cook, how we cook a human being, make one. And so we don't burn it, and so we don't leave any undercooked, and we don't have any overcooked. They all come out just right, and that would be really nice. But I don't think it's practical, and that I don't think people are going to be willing to be pigeonholed, put into those kind of boxes, and said, "This is how you raise a kid. Here's the book, and you're going to follow it, okay, line for line." And create every possible good experience to create as fantastic a human being as possible. One who, by their very nature, would find it repulsive and repugnant to violate society in any way, or to do anything but good things. So that kind of person is creatable. Even one that's not that super is creatable. One that just won't hurt other people intentionally. Doesn't seem like that should be so hard to do, with just carrots. And that's what this argument's pretty much about. It's about carrots and sticks, and whether there's any time you should use the stick, the whip, to work on building human character. And again, I'm not defending it from an idealistic perspective. I say, yeah, I love the idea of carrots for everyone. I just don't think pragmatically or practically it's possible to do that, to have a civilization at that expense. It's too expensive, both in terms of our personal liberty and in the sense that we're all going to start coming out the same, and nobody likes that. It doesn't bother me too much as long as the same is something I like. I think the same would be something I would like, which is the joke, right? I mean, if everybody came out kind of boring but really nice, I think that'd be pretty super. But anyway, I just don't think it's going to happen. I don't think you can make it that happen. And so I just think it is going to be necessary for as far as we can see into the future, which maybe is only a month. You're going to have to scare people into being good, because they're just not going to do it by their own volition. The human character naturally isn't too brilliant. It's pretty bigoted, and it's awfully selfish, and you're not going to fix that one overnight. As stated, I think you can create human beings. You can develop human beings who can rise above their nature, can have a refined sensibility and construct where they will not be at all malicious, at all cheaters in the game of life, and will try to play an upright, straight game by the rules. But anyway, I'm still going to argue that pragmatically we just can't do it. So then the real dilemma is, okay, well, if something has to pay a price, if there has to be a social cost in terms of suffering imposed to have a thing called deterrence, you know, a prevention of crime. Who should have this? Who should be the recipient of that pain? It just seems obvious you tie it to the person committing the crime, because that way the two things are tied together. You want to tie the punishment to the thing, to the act that you're trying to prevent, and you just have to do that as a practical matter to be able to create deterrence, because you're just not going to be able to create enough human character overnight to get away with anything short of that. There's lots of analogies I could make, but you know, there's lots of people who might set a mouse trap in their house and they don't like doing it. They don't want to do it. You know, they would prefer if the mouse wasn't in the house. If there was some way they could talk the mouse into getting out of the house, they would love that. If they could just put a little string of carrots out the front door and the mouse would follow them, they would do it. But it's not practical. And so they set a trap and they do something they don't want to do, cause harm. But they're being pragmatic and practical. And so that's just what it is. That's what it takes to have a house that's not going to get, you know, eaten down by mice. So you could think of mice being more, let's just say they were like termites, like, you know, mammal termites or something. You know, but they do a lot of damage. They can ruin food and do a lot of things. So it's just as a practical matter, this is what you have to do to maintain your civilization, so to speak. And it's not something good. It's just something you have to accept to have, as I stated, the progress of civilization. It comes at a price, and I think it's worth the price. And that's as far as I can take it. I'm not saying that it's worth any price, and I certainly wouldn't advocate for its continuation. But that's, you know, I'm just consuming. If we're going to keep rolling this ball, this is the sensible way to roll it, is in a civilization rather than in a crude world where we aren't civilized and where might makes right, and people with the worst ethics control the agenda. That certainly wouldn't be preferable. So anyway, so I think the stick is necessary, not because I like sticks, not because I want sticks to be used, not because I think sticks are fantastic, but because I do think you have to scare people into good behavior, and that you prevent a lot of crime by having punishment that scares people. So again, this idea that we can say look at the criminal and say, oh, he doesn't know what he's doing, and he's too stupid, and he just hasn't been educated, or he just hasn't had a hug, or he hasn't had this, or he hasn't that, or she. Yeah, I agree, but it doesn't change the fact that you just can't do that. You can't hug them into reformation. You can't give them a warm bath and say everything's okay, because as soon as you do that, there's a lot of people living in absolute hell, in horrible circumstances, because our society doesn't really care about them unless they are a problem. It's like the mice in the real world. You know, they're living in this brutal place called nature, all kinds of animals trying to get them, and yeah, they find your house and say, man, I never had it this good. You know, there's a reward to invading your house, and for criminals there's going to be a reward. Crime will pay for them if you don't have a punishment tied to the activity. If what they're going to get for committing the crime is a warm bath and a hug, trust me, you're going to have a lot more crime. So again, I don't want to be glib or dismissive. I just don't think it's realistic. I think it's just kind of wishful thinking to think you can take the idea of no free will, take the idea that it's not really their fault, and say that means something in society. It really doesn't change any of the significant equations, in the sense that you still pretty much have to maintain a system of deterrence, and you can only do that by making it painful to commit crime. And if you don't make it painful, and I mean painful relative to people living in cardboard boxes in the winter in New York, painful relative to having no money for food, I mean painful for somebody who is in desperate circumstances already, maybe drug addicted, with no place to live. If you make prison anything better than that, you're going to invite crime. You're not even going. It's not that you're going to make crime less scary. You're going to make it actually seductive. Because their life will improve. People who aren't eating are going to find it really nice to go to prison and get 3 meals a day. I only eat 1 meal a day, and I'm going to get 3 if I go to jail. So I'm going to improve my status, my condition, in that circumstance. But I'm just saying, people living in horrible circumstances are not going to be prevented from committing crimes if you make committing crimes some sort of mental disorder for which they're going to be treated as a patient. I'd like it to be that way. It certainly is the truth of the circumstance. They're broken things, and if it's the question of whether they're worth fixing is another subject. It's the same subject, so I might as well talk about it a little bit. I would argue that they're not worth fixing, that society squanders its resources horribly trying to fix broken things. In the world there's literally, quite factually, millions, hundreds of millions of people who will die this year or have their life physically diminished and shortened for lack of $1.50. Some silly amount of money, some just preposterously silly amount of money. They will die because they lack a tiny amount of resources. And so when you think about spending what literally could save thousands of people in another country to incarcerate one individual in one of these civilized countries, that math doesn't make any sense. Now, I'm not saying the people who are advocating for feeling the pain of the broken person in prison are doing a bad thing by feeling that pain. I'm just saying logically, I'm certainly not saying they're to blame for the fact that these civilizations, these cultures, find it possible to ignore the suffering in the rest of the world because of our bigotry, one of those native functions of our biology. But regardless, I'm not saying they made that circumstance, but that circumstance exists. And I would argue to free will, anti-free will advocates who think we need to be more sympathetic to the plight of the criminal, to first fix the social sickness or the cultural sickness that allows us to see desperate poverty in the world and do little or nothing about it. I think until you fix that problem, until you fix the problem with the people who want to live a civilized life, who want to be productive, who want not to invade your house but help you build your house even, those people, until we make a world that they can live in, I think it's kind of silly to worry about the needs and the comfort of people who don't wish to be citizens, who don't wish to play by the rules. It's kind of important. Let's see, check it with time. Okay, halfway. Yeah, so that's a lot. We got a lot covered. So let's see if I can make some more out of this subject. The stick-carrot thing is sort of interesting in terms of our psychology and the nature of our will. There's some people who are put in the category that they're more fatalists. They're not determinists. So there's this distinction between people who understand that determinism doesn't really mean too much. It just means that the thing that we can't we can't see all the little buttons inside of us, just like we can't see all the circuitry inside of a computer. Well, we can look at it, but we're not going to understand it. So there's little things in there that make this happen, to make that happen. There's little things inside of our mind, inside of our brain, events that took place, little memories, little scars, you know, little light bulbs, little blue LEDs, little things. And these things, you know, created by our life experience, and you know, this is all quite mechanical. If you don't have the little blue LED, you don't do this thing. If you didn't learn how to play the piano, you don't play the piano. Now that's determinism. Fatalism would argue that you could never play the piano, that you never will play the piano, that you won't acquire the desire to learn to play the piano and then acquire the knowledge to play the piano and then play the piano because somebody suggested in a video. See this, these fatalists almost think that even if I say something to somebody else, they hear me say it, that somehow that's not going to maybe change their destiny. And of course it could. So everything we're doing is all part of the same play. We're all reading scripts. Yes, our scripts were written for us billions of years ago. They were. That's just the fact. But the fact that it was written billions of years ago doesn't change the fact that I can't pre-read it. I can't see the script in advance. The script comes out of me as a byproduct of my progress through my life. Every little bit of stuff I produce changes who I am, in the sense that it's running gears, and those gears, you could almost say, wear down, or gears get sharper, or gears do different things based on me using them. Themes become important to me. If I talk a lot about free will, I'll think more about free will, that kind of thing. It becomes a theme in my mind by that circumstance. And likewise, the environment I'm exposed to, the people I'll talk to, will hit me with bits of stuff that will change how my gears work now. My gears will get a different tooth on them, and they'll run differently because of that experience. So even though we're all reading a static script, we're reading our static scripts in this very complex community of life experience, where we are inundated with information constantly, every minute of our conscious day anyway, and even our sleeping nights. We're processing the world, we're running the gears, and the gears are changing as we run them. They change each other through the mashing in and mashing out. So we're constantly refining the function of our sense of identity and our function. Our function's constantly being augmented through every minute of every day, through all the other determined events that are happening, but there's just so many of them that it seems, as you're living it, that it's not something that could possibly be pre-orchestrated, because it's just so complicated a dance. It's like nobody could do that on purpose kind of argument. There's too many steps for somebody to do it on purpose kind of thing. It's like juggling 1,000 baseballs. Nobody could juggle 1,000 baseballs. There's too much to be aware of. And it's like we can't possibly be aware of all the influences that are affecting us. We can't possibly be aware of all the vocabulary and how in our subconscious it's being manipulated and changed with every conversation. So we can't see any of that. We can't know any of that. We can't comprehend any of that. We can't visualize any of that. Our brain can't understand that level of complexity, in the sense that it can't comprehend it. Yes, it can understand it exists, but it can't internalize it. It can't make it part of itself in terms of a knowledge. It can't have true knowledge of it. And so it will always seem like surprising. Life will always seem eventful, because we just can't see the scripts and to any deep level. We can obviously, as you become more aware of how the world works, you become more, say if you're more thoughtful and reflective in living your life, you can often see things. You know, you can see a crack in the staircase, you know, in the cement or something, and say, well, that needs to be fixed because, you know, that brick could come loose and somebody could fall down. So you can sort of see events that may or may not be part of what would happen if you didn't see it. So there's lots of stuff where we can do some predicting, we can do some understanding that there's a correlation between things. We can even do it on this big broad scale where we say, yes, raising kids in sewers and in noisy, harassed environments is likely not going to make them very good human beings when they grow up. Giving them a lot of stress and tension in their maturation is probably going to make them scared and angry, and that fear and anger isn't going to reflect very well in terms of what it's going to produce in society. So how am I doing? 20 minutes. Okay. Sorry. Got to keep checking. I didn't check the time, so I don't want to go over. But that's what's happening. You know, we're constantly have to check the time. We constantly have to, because we can't be aware of all these elements, all these things that are happening. So it's always going to feel like we're doing something innovative, and we, you know, when I say that, I'm emphasizing because there really isn't any. We is just our brain pieces, our different programs, our different identities, our different personalities, our different interests, our different wills. And that's really something to understand, is when people talk about free will, it's a wrong sentence in so many ways. The free part is kind of ludicrous, and the will part doesn't say what's really going on. It's wills. It's you have different interests, and what your brain merely does is process those interests, and based on which one is a stronger theme in your identity, that will determine which way you turn, left or right. It'll depend on your psychological and philosophical bias for that day. If the choice exists and you're philosophically aware, let's just say you saw somebody get hit by a car, and now you're more aware of the dangers of jaywalking. It may, that event may influence you in a way where now as soon as you're in a circumstance where you may okay, have the impulse to turn right because it's a shortcut, it's a jaywalk, or go left, you know, and take the longer way, you may now have this reflexive reaction that will compel you to go the right way, in the sense of go the way where you won't compromise, you won't be accepting a risk that you're now aware of. You're rejecting the risk and saying it's a silly or stupid risk. It's a calculation your brain does, and so you can't really call it something you willed, because you had perfect knowledge. It was knowledge that drove you one way, or knowledge that will drive you another way. And that we know that sometimes it's not knowledge that drives us, but desire and compulsion and fear and a lot of other negative emotions that may drive you to do something that you know is wrong. And that's the battle that'll take place inside your psychology, and we call whatever wins our will, but it really, you know, it wasn't a will battle. It was a battle of ideas. It was a battle between desire and principles, desire and your psychological character, your integrity. These kind of words are what maintain you existing where you tend to try to go the right way instead of the wrong way. Are concepts like self-esteem and self-respect, honor, integrity. It's kind of important concepts in terms of driving you in positive ways. And taking this back to the origin of the conversation, you know, this is sort of a carrot-stick argument, because some of these principles are kind of stick-like. We'd like to think that we do the right thing for the right reason, but we often do the right thing merely because we're afraid of the dishonor of doing the wrong thing. We're afraid of the stick of being called a jerk or an asshole or unproductive or lazy or useless or functionalist or destructive, or we don't want these negative labels. And so it is, in a sense, a stick, a kind of threat to our psychological well-being that we are creating all mentally, but it's our own creation of a stick, but it's still a stick. And we're essentially, one side of us, one part of our brain, is essentially threatening another part of your brain with some brutalization if it doesn't do the right thing. So in some sense, any conversation about some ideal where we would try to, encourage people to do the right thing with some sort of positive reinforcement, in a sense, is always going to fail as a complete idealistic principle, because I think the very concepts themselves, the very concepts of moderating desire, require you to create a stick. That you can't compete with desire, the visual desire to do something, with something other than an emotion. And your intellect can't really create desire. A principle can't create desire. It has to work with the ones that already exist inside of you. And so in a sense, it has to threaten some other desire with a lack of fulfillment. The desire to be thought of well by others, ego desires. It has to threaten those for you to be able to do the right thing, because your brain can't synthesize the actual addiction to something like self-esteem, something like the respect of somebody you admire. These kinds of psychological things your brain can't create. It can only manipulate them. So ideas can only manipulate your crude, visceral functioning. And often it has to manipulate them by threatening them, with destruction, and threatening your psychological comfort with something negative. And so, unfortunately, I don't like that these negative mechanisms are effective, but they are. And you're not going to avoid them inside the nature of the human organism or the thinking organism, as long as it is a desiring machine. And if it doesn't desire, it's really not going to be terribly interested in doing anything. So anyway, I think we're about done. Yeah, another 2 minutes. So, yeah, so I just, I'm a little wary of conversation about how society, once it accepts that we're just programmed machines, and that we either function well or we function badly, you either describe us as productive or inefficient, let's say, and it doesn't really have anything to do with any kind of blame notions. That fact that it's not a blame notion just doesn't change what we have to do to maintain civilization. And unfortunately, you have to. You just can't treat the sick people all that well, as long as the sickness is contagious, and as long as other people will create the disease in terms of doing crime, unless you associate it with harm. And it's just a fact, a necessary one for, as far as I can see, into the future. So anyway, so about do it. So till next time, and yeah, that's about it. I'll just a little wind down, end of the show music. Do 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 do. So thank you for listening, and yeah, till next time.